Thank you, sir. Um, Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Are You Code Ready? With the recent implementation of the 4 labor codes, we have all joined today's session to understand the codes better. And implementation, it will consequence it will have in the course of our roles or responsibilities. The session will be conducted by Mr. K. Varadan, and I'll just give a brief introduction about Mr. Varadan, though it's not required. Mr. Vardhan is a seasoned HR leader with 30 plus years of distinguished experience, widely respected across the industry for his deep expertise in labor laws and strategic compliance. As the Chief Consultation Officer at Aprajita Corporate Services, he has been instrumental in shaping and strengthening the organization's flagship compliance management services since joining the leadership team in 2005. Beginning his career with TVS and Sons in 1988, he brings strong academic credentials in mathematics, law, personal management, and counseling. He's actively associated with leading employer forums such as CII, EFSI, and IPM, and also contributes as visiting faculty at various reputed institutions. There is nobody else uh, with Aprajita that can explain labor codes better than Mr. Vardhan, and I'll hand it over to him now. So for you.
Yeah, thank you, Shaurya. Just confirm whether the screen is visible. One of you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The screen is visible. You might just want to change the display settings. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, now.
1 second. Yeah. Perfect now.
Right, okay. Thank you. Thank you once again. Yeah, good evening, every one of you. And I think at the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Madhukar for having me here. So this session is exclusively planned for the HR members of the Vibrant HR Group. I think I know Madhukar since his SPIC days. I learned that he is right now settled in Chennai. And as many of you are aware, I think the labor codes, the much awaited labor codes, I think it was introduced after a lot of hurdles on 21st of November 2025. The background is the economic reforms happened sometime in 1991. Since that time, in fact, the industries were asking for corresponding labor reforms, but somehow it did not happen in these years. Probably in 2019 only, for the first time, the Code on Wages was passed in both the Houses of Parliament. And subsequently in 2020, all the other 3 codes, occupational safety, social security, and industrial relations, they were also passed. But again, yes, we had that COVID pandemic period for 2 to 3 years. And there are objections from unions on some of the changes made through the courts. But still, overall, if we look at it, in my opinion, when we come up with changes like this in a big way, definitely there will be certain aspects which would be favorable for, say, employers. There would be certain factors which would be favorable for employees, and even some of the aspects would be favorable for the third main stakeholder, that is the government authorities, enforcement authorities. But the idea is to simplify, at least quantitatively in the first place, right? The number of laws under the labor domain, since this is a subject which falls under the concurrent list, we have around 44, 45 central legislations, and in addition, each state has 2 to 10 legislations. So total number of parent legislations alone in this domain goes beyond 200. And yes, in addition to that, we have subordinate legislations. So when it comes to the question of compliance, unless and otherwise, we are fairly familiar with the provisions of all these parent as well as subordinate legislations. It will be a little challenging for ensuring 100% compliance. So the idea is to reduce the volume in the first place, and also in doing the compliance, that is the process. Process easiness is also brought in through the codes, mainly leveraging on the technology that would automatically bring in transparency. That is the idea. So ultimately, it is to reduce the burden of doing the compliance. So it will become part of ease of doing business, and it should also attract FDIs, and ultimately it should generate employment. So this is the broader aim with which the labor codes are brought in. And as you are seeing in your screens, whatever changes we are talking about, it is happening only in the central sphere, right? So 29 central legislations. These 29 legislations are getting subsumed into 4 codes. So the code on wages, the existing set of 4 legislations will get subsumed into one code called Code on Wages. So when we say the 4 legislations, it is the Equal Remuneration Act, the Payment of Wages Act, the Minimum Wages Act, and the Payment of Bonus Act. So after the introduction of the codes, we will have only one code. We may not have 4 such separate legislations. Similarly, Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, the existing set of 13 legislations, right? Factories Act, Contract Labor Act, Interstate Migrant Workers Act, Mines Act, Motor Transport Workers Act. Like that, 13 legislations are getting subsumed into one code called Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code. And the Social Security, it encompasses the PF Act, the ESI Act, the Gratuity Act, the Employees Compensation. So these are all the legislations coming under Code on Social Security. And finally, the Industrial Relations Code, it will have the existing 3 legislations, the Industrial Disputes Act, the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, and the Trade Unions Act. These 3 legislations are getting subsumed into one code called Industrial Relations Code. Of course, we all know that Industrial Disputes Act is considered to be the backbone of entire set of labor domain that is now becoming part of the Industrial Relations Code. So instead of 29 legislations, separate legislations, now become 4 codes. I move on. And the first code, the Code on Wages, this is how the chapters are arranged. I would like to draw your attention to whatever I have mentioned in red font. So the Equal Remuneration, Minimum Wages Act, Payment of Wages, Payment of Bonus. So hitherto, I think there were 4 separate legislations, but now all these concepts have become part of Code on Wages. So though the volume is coming down, the number of legislations is coming down, the idea, the concept, it is not compromised. So it remains still. So there will not be any reduction in the benefits or welfare of the workers also. And though it is getting reduced, probably in quantity, this will not compromise on the spirit of compliance or the very purpose of the existing set of legislations. So other things, other than these 4 areas under chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, which are in the red font, the enforcement authorities and other administrative items, no, this will be common for the purposes of all these 4 legislations. So hitherto it was again separate and separate set of administrative authorities were monitoring the compliance under these legislations, but now it will become one. So other areas will become common. I move on. The second code is Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, and the chapters are arranged in this fashion. So totally there will be 13 chapters, and we have 3 schedules attached to this code. And again, I would like to draw your attention to chapter 11, which is in red font. So chapter 11 on your right side, it is further divided into various parts. So the part 1 deals with the contract labor. CL is contract labor and ISMW is interstate migrant workers. So part 1 deals with both these areas, and part 2 is on audiovisual worker. The current Cine Workers Act, those Cine workers are now termed as audiovisual workers. And part 3 is about mines. Part 4 is about BD and cigar industries workers. Part 5 is about building and other construction workers. And part 6 is about factories. So the Factories Act, all the provisions or essential provisions of Factories Act will get included in part 6 under factories portion in chapter 11 of Occupation Safety Code. So the idea remains the same, the concept remains same. There is no compromise on it. But if we look at other chapters from chapter 1 to 9 and chapter 12, chapter 13, those are all again common for all these, whether it is a factory or a mine or BD and cigar industry, or it is about contract labor or interstate migrant worker or building and other construction workers. I move on. So the third code is Code on Social Security, again from chapter 3 to chapter 9 and chapter 13. So you can see Provident Fund. We know there is a separate legislation now governing Provident Fund, which is the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1952. So that is repealed, but the key provisions of the Provident Fund Act will is getting included in the Code on Social Security under chapter 3, right? Similarly, employees state insurance, so ESI, so gratuity. So no more it will remain as separate legislations, but these are there as separate chapters under these codes. And chapter 13, it is about employment information and monitoring. It is the current employment exchanges. The terminology will again change. So instead of employment exchange, we will probably after the introduction of codes, we will call it as career centers, right? Where probably it could be, need not necessarily be a physical office. Probably it could be a platform also, IT platform, where the job seekers and job providers and other aggregators can culminate in the platform. That is the idea again. Then finally, Industrial Relations Code, as I said, the industrial disputes, the standing orders, and the trade unions. All the 3 are included in the Industrial Relations Code, and probably chapter 3, which talks about trade unions, chapter 4 talks about standing orders, and the rest, chapter 5 to chapter 12, which are in red font. These are all provisions existing under the Industrial Disputes Act. Now it is becoming part of Industrial Relations Code, right? This is how the chapters are arranged. And just to summarize, probably if you look at the first row, acts under different codes. Under Code on Wages, currently there are 4 acts, but once the code is introduced, it will become 1. Similarly, Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, we have 13 legislations that will become 1 code. And the IR code, instead of 3 legislations, it will be 1. And the Code on Social Security, instead of 9 legislations, it will become 1. So the number per se will come down. Instead of 29 legislations, we can say it will be only 4 codes which would govern these aspects with respect to industries. That is how it is. And the second row is on sections. If we look at the current 4 legislations under Code on Wages, payment of wages, minimum wages, equal remuneration, and payment of bonus, all the 4 legislations put together, the total number of sections, it is coming to 115. But on the right side, under Code on Wages, if we look at it, the number of sections would be only 69. So again, the number of sections is coming down. And the draft rules, if you compare whatever is available under the current 4 legislations, there are 67 rules. Those 67 rules are becoming 58 as per the draft central rules. And the definitions, the number of terms defined under these 4 legislations, it is 46, but now it is becoming 26 under the code. Number of returns, it is coming from 3 to 0. Number of statutory registers to be maintained, it is coming down from 14 to 3. And the number of abstracts, it is coming down from 2 to 0. The number of statutory notices, it is reducing from 2 to 1. So this is how it will be for all the 4 codes, but with a slight exception in the IR code. If you look at the number of sections in the IR code alone, it is getting increased. Instead of 88, it is becoming 104, right? So I think there are certain new aspects which are getting added. Concepts are introduced through the IR code. So that is one reason why the number of sections is increasing, right? Otherwise, when you look at it from the compliance perspective, it is the procedure will be easy, the process will become easy, the quantum will also come down actually. That is how it is. But as I said in the beginning, though these are all coming down, the quantum volume, but the spirit is not compromised. The effort of preparing all these returns, say 5 returns, probably in the place of 50 returns, the efforts will be the same, right? But physically the number will come down because there is no compromise in the spirit of the compliance. I move on. Right, okay. Now on your screens, you are seeing the definition for the term wages. Before getting into it, probably I'll take some time to discuss on this definition, specifically for the term wages. Because there is a small change which is made, because of which there could be a huge impact when we actually do the compliance. Let me try to explain that. So after analyzing the definition, I have certain sample salary structures to explain it from various perspectives like minimum wages, how it will work for ESI, how this will work for bonus, how this will impact for gratuity, like that. Key areas only, not for all, for us to understand it more clearly. That is the idea. So I will harp on this definition for some more time. After that, I will try to highlight only the key changes happening through the introduction of the labor codes. So that is how it is going to be from now on. So this definition for the term wages, it has all the parts. It has substantive part, it has inclusion part, it has exclusion part, it has provisos, it has the explanation part also that continues in the subsequent slide. So substantive part says all remuneration by way of salaries, allowances or otherwise, and expressed in terms of money or capable of being so expressed, and as per the terms of the employment, that is the appointment order. So that is the substantive part, and it very specifically includes basic DNS allowance, retaining allowance, if any. Retaining allowance is more applicable to seasonal industries. As many of you may be already aware, this component is paid to workers in the seasonal industry to retain them for the next season. So during the non-season period, the employer of the industry will continue to make the payment. So the idea is to retain them for the next season. That is the idea. Now coming to exclusion part, I think we have a big list starting from class A to class K. Right. So all these are excluded. So some of these components may form part of the monthly gross salary of an employee. But even if it is done, that will be excluded. That will not be treated as wage part. So that is the reason this is coming under exclusion. Quickly, so any bonus, I think they refer to the bonus paid under the statute. Probably prior to codes, it is under the Payment of Bonus Act. After the introduction of codes, it is under the Code on Wages. So if it is paid as per that statute, then that will not be considered as part of wages. That will be excluded. The value of house accommodation, and any contribution made by the employer to any pension or provident fund, and the interest which may have accrued thereon, that will also be excluded. Any conveyance allowance, any sum paid to defray special expenditure, considering the nature of employment of that specific group of persons or one person. And HRA, it is excluded. Remuneration payable under any award or settlement, it is excluded. Any overtime allowance, excluded. Any commission, excluded. Any gratuity, any retrenchment compensation. Again, I would like to draw your attention to those classes which are in red font, D, F, G, H. So yes, these four components are getting excluded from the definition of the term wages, but for two areas. One is payment of wages, another one is equal remuneration. For these two purposes alone, all these four components will continue to be part of wages, right? That is one thing. And I move on to the next slide where the definition continues. Yeah, now we are in the proviso part. This first proviso, I think this is where the catch is actually. It says there are substantive part, there is a inclusion part, there is an exclusion part, but subject to, provided that for calculating wages under this class, if payments made by the employer to the employee under classes A to I, if it exceeds 1/2, as on date it is 1/2 only, but central government has got powers to revise this. So when we say 1/2, it is 50%. So if the components mentioned from classes A to I in the exclusion part, if it goes beyond the 50% of the total monthly remuneration, then the excess amount will be added back to the basic wage and DA, that is the inclusion part. That will also be considered as a part of wages, right? So this particular proviso puts a cap on the exclusion part. It cannot exceed 50%. That is the idea. Earlier, there was no such specific mention under any of the existing legislations. So this is newly brought in through the courts. And the second proviso is provided further that for the purposes of equal wages, that is equal remuneration to all genders, and for the purposes of payment of wages, this is what I said, the emoluments specified in classes D, F, G, and H shall be taken for computation of wages. So D, F, G, and H will continue to be considered as part of wages for the purposes of equal remuneration and payment of wages. For all other purposes, minimum wage, bonus, gratuity, PF, ESI, maternity benefit, anything, those are all excluded. And finally, the explanation part, it very clearly says that the payment can also be made in kind, but it cannot go beyond 15%. Right, but this can be done only if there is a gazette notification issued by the appropriate government. Otherwise, we cannot resort to making part of the wage payment in kind. It is not possible. As on date, there is no such notification in any of the states or even notification by the central government. So necessarily, we may have to make the 100% of wages to the employees in cash only. Of course, when we say cash, it should be in cash or by way of check or by giving bank credit. That is how it is. Now, I'll try to explain this the definition with some specific examples. Yeah, I think you are seeing on your screens a very simple salary structure. I have come up with 4 components: basic, HRA, conveyance, and commission. So the monthly gross, the total remuneration comes to 18,000. So the 100% comes to 18,000. If you look at basic, works out to 6,000 only here, and that is 33.3%. HRA, conveyance, and commission. So total comes to 12,000. 12,000 means it is 66.6%. So this goes beyond 50%. The house rent allowance, conveyance allowance, and the commission, they are all considered to be excluded components. But as per the definition, the excluded component cannot go beyond 50%. That's what the definition says. So the excess, that is the 3,000, that will be added back to the wage part. That will be added to basic. So for this simple salary structure, after the implementation of code, the wage portion should work out to at least 9,000. It cannot be anything below 9,000. So this is the catch. Because of the change, because of the first proviso given for the definition of the term wage, this is going to be the impact. And one other point I would like to clarify is the first proviso says the payment to the employee under classes A to I. This A to I, yes, we have 9 components, of which bonus is one. But bonus is essentially an annual payment and it is made only after the end of the accounting year. So that's, I have not added that in the monthly wage portion. That is number one. In my 100%, I have not added bonus. Similarly, the third one, any contribution, class C, any contribution paid by the employer to any pension fund or provident fund. See, that will happen on a regular basis every month. But calculating this amount and adding it in the 100% remuneration, it will be difficult. It's not practically possible. So I am consciously excluding the class A and class C while I determine the 100% wage. So I just restrict my gross as the 100% remuneration, considering all the other classes except A and C. Though the proviso says it is from A and I, practically it is not possible to include A and C, right? But there are people who have opinion that should also get added, but somehow it is not convincing for me. That is number one. Number two, it is not practically possible. So I am not including these two components for this purpose. So I consider merely the monthly wage payable to an employee as 100% wage, because it is very important to fix in the first place the 100% of wages. Only then out of which we have to ascertain what is 50% and what are all the components in that. So that is how I will proceed for the rest of the discussions also during this session. I move on. Now I think you are looking at a situation where mere minimum rates of wages are paid. Come up with 3 cases, probably companies definitely for their regular employees, permanent employees, they will pay much more than the minimum rates of wages. But this can happen with respect to contract workers. This can happen with respect to casual employees whenever they are hired for a few days, right? So the industries may just pay the minimum wages applicable to them. They may not pay more than that, right? Now I have also assumed 12,000 is the minimum rates of wages for all the 3 cases. So the assumption is 12,000, which is the minimum wage. Now case 1, basic is 10,000, DNS allowance is 2,000. So it is the minimum wage is split into basic and DA, right? So as per the definition of the term wages, this split up is in order. This split up is in order, and we will consider entire 12,000 for all purposes, be it a PF or ESI or bonus or gratuity or minimum wages, whatever you take, because basic and DNS allowance are all universal payments, and both these 2 components will be considered for all purposes. That is how it is. So case 1 split up is absolutely all right as per the new definition. Case 2, it is a mere consolidated pay. There is no split up. We are paying a consolidated pay, one lump sum payment every month. This is 12,000. This is not less than 12,000. That is less than minimum wage. So this is also all right, because we will consider entire 12,000 for any purpose. Now come to case 3. I have consciously again put it in red font. I have split it into basic 10,000, HRA 2,000. I think currently for many of the contract workers, I think this is how it is done actually. And for this split up may be all right as per the existing Minimum Wages Act, but this is not all right as per the new definition of wages under the Code on Wages. That is the difference, because we saw that HRA is excluded. So for this structure, the quantum of wages will be considered to be only 10,000. whereas the minimum wages to be paid is 12,000 here. So there is a shortage of 2,000. So if we still go ahead with this kind of structure, even after the implementation of codes, then in case if any of the authorities take cognizance, then they may ask the employer concerned to make good of the shortage. So this is, I think this is very specific to cases where mere minimum rates of wages are paid. I move on. Yeah, this is also with respect to minimum wages, but it is more than a minimum wage. The gross is more than minimum wage. So basic 6,000, DA 3,000, HRA 3,000. The monthly gross comes to 12,000, and I have assumed here minimum wage as 10,000. Right. Again, HRA is excluded as per the new definition for a Minimum Wages Act purpose also. Right. That is now this will differ from the existing provision, because under the existing Minimum Wages Act, HRA is considered to be part of wages. We will include 3,000. So this split up is all right for the existing Minimum Wages Act, but as per the new definition of the term wages under the codes, since HRA is excluded, the quantum of wages for this structure will work out to only 9,000. Right, but minimum wages we have assumed is 10,000. So 9,000 is less than 10,000. So there is a shortage. So prior to codes, this structure may be all right, but post the implementation of codes, this structure may not be all right. Right. I move on. Now it is bonus. Again, a simple structure. I have 5 components. Normally, what we will do, we will consider only basic and DA for calculation of bonus. So that works out to 14,000. But the monthly gross is 32,000 here. Wage portion is less than 50%. So exclusion portion goes beyond 50%, which is not acceptable again, as we discussed earlier. So at least the basic and DA should work out to 16,000, which is the 50% of the monthly gross. Right. So that is the specific change as far as this particular structure is concerned. Otherwise, for calculation purpose, irrespective of whether it is 14,000 or 16,000, since both the amounts are less than 21,000, this person will be eligible for bonus, but calculation will be made for 7,000 or minimum rates of wages applicable to that person, whichever is higher. That is how it is. So the quantum of wage alone in this wage structure should change. Now it is with respect to ESI. I have come up with 2 samples. Again, simple structure only. The first sample, the monthly gross comes to 24,000, basic 12,000, DA 6,000 and HRA 6,000. HRA is part of wages under ESI, current ESI Act. Right. So including that, since the gross is 24,000, this goes more than 21,000, which is the ceiling. Then this person need not be covered under ESI. He will go out of the purview of ESI. But as per the new definition of the term wages, HRA will not be considered as wages. So for this structure, the quantum of wage would be treated as only 18,000, which means it is less than 21,000. Then this person needs to be covered under ESI. So the position completely changes because of the change in the definition. Right. Now come to sample 2. Again, same components only. The quantum alone is changing. 8,000, 4,000, 4,000. So monthly gross is 16,000. Right. Since 16,000 is less than 21,000, this person is coverable under ESI, and contributions will be made on entire 16,000. But after the change in the definition of the term wages, this HRA 4,000.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The change in wage definition.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I think the team is giving me a new update. That's why on the codes. Yeah, I'm sorry again. So the HRA here is 4,000, which is excluded. So for this salary structure, the quantum of salary would be 12,000. So this person will continue to be covered under ESI, but contributions will be made only on 12,000. So this will be favorable for both employer as well as employees. So because of the change in definition, in some cases, it could favor the stakeholders. In some cases, it may not. That is how it is. Now I move on. Gratuity. So again, 5 components. Total monthly gross comes to 30,000. Basic and DA works out to 12,000. So normally we will calculate gratuity considering only basic and DA, that is the 12,000. But after the introduction of codes, it should be at least 15,000 because 50% of the monthly gross is 15,000. So post the implementation of codes for this salary structure, we need to calculate gratuity at least on 15,000. This is how it is. So far we saw the definition of wages, which is very crucial, and its impact. And this is how this can impact, right? Right. I think, as I said, I wanted to harp on this specifically, but because this will be very, very crucial for going ahead with respect to our compliance activities, because this will have impact on all aspects. I have just come up with certain examples only for certain specific areas. PF is there, maternity benefit is there. We may have to calculate overtime on a regular basis. We may have to calculate leave encashment. Then if we start discussing on all these aspects, that will take more time. I just stop with this, but this could be the impact because of the change in the definition of the wages. From now on, I'll highlight the key changes alone with respect to specific areas. I'll also try to make comparison between what the existing situation and how it gets changed after the implementation of code. Right, Minimum Wages Act, again, it is applicable only to the nature of industries which are mentioned in the schedule attached to the Act. Right, but post the implementation, it is made applicable to all industries and all employees, provided minimum rates of wages should have been prescribed. Right, so the appropriate governments should have formed a committee for several industries, and they should have decide on the list, the quantum of minimum rates of wages for unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled and highly skilled persons. Only then we will be able to go ahead. But if the minimum rates of wages are fixed, then definitely the industries must pay not less than that amount as wages to all the employees for whom it is applicable. So the idea here is, irrespective of the nature of industry the one company is involved in, the Minimum Wages Act will be applicable, or minimum wages portion under the code on wages will be applicable after the implementation of code. And currently we have a concept called national floor level minimum wage. It does not have statutory backup, and this quantum is notified by the central government. In case if for some of the industries the Minimum Wages Act is not applicable, they used to follow the rate fixed by the central government as national floor level minimum wage. This is only in practice. This is not a statutory mandate, right? This is the existing situation. But now under the codes, instead of national floor level minimum wage, it will be known as mere floor wage. That is number one. Number two, this floor wage will be fixed by the central government, and it will be applicable all across, and it can also be region wise, geography based, need not necessarily be one single quantum. But it will be fixed by the central government. Then third part is the appropriate governments, central government as well as various state governments. They will continue to fix minimum rates of wages. The catch is such minimum rate of wages shall not be less than the floor wage fixed by the central government. So indirectly, the statutory backup is given for the concept of floor wage. And HRA, yes, as per the Minimum Wages Act, it is part of wages, but the position is changing with the new definition of the term wages under the code on wages. Similarly, gross monthly pay was considered as probably to determine whether a company is paying minimum rates of wages to their employees or not. They probably earlier the inspectors would check on the gross wage only. There, I think HRA will be there, other allowances would be there. But now because of the changed situation, it is not possible. So except all other components which are very specifically excluded under the definition of the term wages, rest should be at least equivalent to or more than minimum rates of wages. Otherwise, it will be deemed that that company is not paying minimum wage. There is a shortage. Yeah. So these are all certain key items with respect to minimum wages. And now on your screens, these are all certain items with respect to payment of wages. If you look at section 1(6) of the Payment of Wages Act, currently, it says that those persons who are drawing more than 24,000 as gross per month, they are all excluded from the purview of Payment of Wages Act, right? That ceiling is now removed. So irrespective of the quantum of salary a person is drawing, all the employees would become part of under the purview of Payment of Wages Act. And secondly, gratuity, again, it is very clearly excluded from the definition of the term wages. We saw that actually it was there in class J, right? So gratuity paid upon termination of the services of an employee, that is clearly excluded. Earlier also that was the position, but there was a judgment by the Madras High Court in Madras Fertilizers case, which said gratuity was part of wages. Right. That is the reason in Tamil Nadu alone, the authorities used to insist the establishment to pay gratuity to the contract workers if the contractor fails to make that payment. Right, because gratuity was treated as wages. So that position will now change. It is very clear after the introduction of courts, gratuity will not be treated as part of wages. Then wage settlement to be made within 2 working days, but not for resignation cases. That is the earlier situation, right, prior to courts. But the same position continues, but even for resignation cases, the wage settlement is to be made within 2 working days from the actual date of relieving. Right, so probably the employers may have to have a very stringent process before relieving a person from the services due to resignation. Right, if at all, if there is a notice period prescribed, then that shall be insisted upon. Only then the employer can be ready with making the settlement within 2 days. And in case of establishments which engage more than 1,000 employees, the payment of wages is to be made before 10th of the subsequent month. But if there are less than 1,000 employees, it should be made within 7 days. So both the options were available, but after the introduction of the courts, it should be made before 7th. The option of going up to 10th day is not available for the employers anymore. Right. So irrespective of whether an establishment is engaging less than 1,000 or more than 1,000, wages are to be disbursed within 7 days. And total deduction from the salary, monthly salary of an employee can go up to 50%. But if the deduction is towards cooperative societies, partially or fully, it can go up to 75%. That is the existing provision. But after the courts, it should be restricted to 50%. So at least 50% of the monthly salary should go as net take-home pay for the employee concerned. So these are all certain changes with respect to payment of wages. I'll just take a moment. Yeah, so payment of bonus, the salary ceiling for eligibility is 21,000. And salary ceiling for calculation is you can restrict it to 7,000 or minimum rate of wages, whichever is higher, right? But now, and this is uniform, it is across India for all establishments, but now the powers are given to the appropriate governments to fix ceiling both for eligibility and for calculation. So this amount could vary from one state to another state. We may have to wait for the Gazette notification from the appropriate governments. And payment can be made by any mode currently for bonus, can be by way of cash or by through check or by giving a bank credit. But post the implementation of code, it should be made only by giving bank credit. And certain misconducts, if it is proved then the bonus can be withheld for that particular person who indulged in that misconduct. In addition to whatever list given under the Act, conviction for sexual harassment is also now added. In case if a person is convicted for committing some sexual harassment, then that will also be a cause for disqualification for bonus. This is added now, one more cause for withholding the bonus. And this is with respect to contract labor in relation to wages only, right? So the regular workers of a contractor are not considered to be contract workers. See, this was the position even early, but it was not explicit. It was not expressly mentioned anywhere. So it had to be derived. That is how it was. But now, under the definition of the term contract labor itself, the code, through the code, it very clearly excludes the direct employees of the contractor. And the company, that is the principal employer, shall pay to the contractor before the contractor makes the payment of wages, because the contractor as employer has to disperse salary to his workers, that is contract workers, within 7 days, because that 7 days timeline is equally applicable to contract workers also. So to enable the contractor to make that payment, the principal employer has to release the monthly consideration to the contractor, right? In most of the cases, it is not so nowadays. So, but through these codes, this is, I think this is being insisted. And again, we may have to have a stringent process. So the principal employer may have to release the monthly consideration to the contractor within 7 days, so that the contractor in turn can make the monthly salary payment to his workers again within 7 days. That is the idea. But of course, this comes through Rule 55. The rules are not yet implemented, but still this is going to come. And the principal employer currently, as per the legal position, he is not liable to pay bonus, irrespective of whether the contractor pays or fails to pay, right? But after the introduction of codes, if the contractor fails to pay, then the liability will pass on to the principal employer. He has to at least make minimum bonus payment, that is 8.33%. And very specifically, the term employer would include contractor also. Even today, that is the legal position, but again, it was not expressed. But now it is very clearly mentioned in the definition of the term employer. Yeah, I move on. I think these are all certain common points with respect to code on wages. So both the terms employee as well as worker, both the terms are defined, and this is how the definition is. So you can see in the intersection portion, persons involved in skilled, unskilled, manual, operational, technical, and clerical work. All those people, all these persons, they are all considered to be both, they are falling under the definition of both worker as well as employee, right? But on your right, I think W refers to worker. The supervisors, if their salaries are less than 15,000, then he will be treated as a worker. If the salary is more than 15,000, then they would not be considered as workers, but they would be employees. And working journalists and sales promotion employees, they all will be considered as workers. And persons who are involved in managerial work or administrative work, they all will be considered as employees. They will not be treated as workers. And probably under the employee definition, the first class you can see semi-skilled. I think under the definition of employee, it is very clearly mentioned the semi-skilled workers are also to be treated as employees. But in my opinion, that should come in the intersection portion. But it is missing in the worker definition. That is why I have brought it here. But I think there is some error here. In my opinion, since skilled is also there in the intersection portion, unskilled is also there in both the definitions. Naturally, the semi-skilled should also fall in that category only. That should be a clerical error. And the next point is the period of limitation is 3 years for making any claim, right? Whether it is shortage of bonus or shortage of payment of wages or shortage of minimum wages or delayed payment or unauthorized deduction. If in case if there is any, then the employee concerned should raise the claim within 3 years. And instead of manual, there is a proposal to introduce web-based inspection scheme, and the inspectors will now be known as inspectors cum facilitators. So they will facilitate both the management as well as the employees in the first place. Only then they will go in for prosecution in case if the compliance is not done by the employer. And next point is very important, because the court can take cognizance directly if they receive some complaint from employee or from the registered trade union. Hitherto, I think whenever the inspector comes for inspection, then only he will approach the court, and then some prosecution can happen in case of any contravention. But now under the courts, even the employee or the registered trade union connected to the establishment, they can send the complaint directly to the court, so the court can take cognizance also. And in case of any dispute, the burden of proof lies with the employer, right? And the geographical areas are classified as metropolitan, non-metropolitan, and rural areas. It is based on the population. If it is less than 10 lakh, it would be considered as rural area. 10 to 40 lakh will be considered as non-metropolitan. More than 40 lakh people, that area will be considered as metropolitan. An undisbursed amount, it should be dispersed in case of death of an employee, or the whereabouts of the employee is not known. It should be paid to the nominee. So the employer has to do it within 6 months. But within 6 months, if it is not possible for some valid reason, employer can deposit the due amount with the authority concerned. Then who in turn will become responsible for dispersing it properly, right? Now through the courts, the compounding of offense is introduced, which means in case if there is a deviation, contravention, and for that contravention only fine is prescribed as punishment, then in such a situation the employer can approach the gazetted officer appointed specifically for this purpose, pay the 50% of the maximum fine prescribed, then come out of that situation, right? But this will be available only for the first case, not for subsequent occurrences. I move on. I think we have come to the end of code on wages. Now we will move on to the second code, and this is specifically under factories. So if a manufacturing process is carried on with the aid of power, then there should be minimum of 10 persons for that premises to become a factory. Or if the manufacturing process is carried on without the aid of power, then at least 20 persons are required. That in that situation also, that premises will be considered as a factory. Then the Factories Act will become applicable. Then registration, licensing, and all the other statutory formalities are to be done, right? This threshold number of 10 and 20, now it is getting increased to 20 and 40. That is the key here. Probably on your right side, you can do the comparison from what is existing currently. Similarly, for night shift for women, it is not permitted. Generally, it is prohibited under section 66(1)(b) of the current Factories Act, right? Except for a few states, including Tamil Nadu. But now through the courts, the women workers can be asked to work during the night time, but after following certain specific conditions. Like I think the conditions can be derived from the POSH Act also, Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. Probably the transportation should be given, and proper security shall be given. All those conditions are there. So that needs to be followed. Then overtime, it was an obligation, and if a worker is asked to do overtime, he cannot refuse it. If he refuses, then that can be considered as a misconduct, and the employer can proceed against that worker, right? But after the introduction of codes, yes, the employer can continue to ask the workers to do overtime, but it is only with the consent of the workers. So that is again going to be a key. And the maximum overtime, currently we can go up to 75 hours with the special permission, but under the codes, it is raised to 125 hours. And independent director cannot become occupier of a factory. So it should be from among one of the whole-time directors. And it is better that person is nominated and specifically communicated to the authority concerned, so that in case of any contravention, the authority concerned will send notice only to that director who is nominated as an occupier. Otherwise, he can send the notice to any of the directors of his choice. So let us not, as employers, give room to the inspectors for that. Then, in case if a factory has more than 1,000 workers, then a safety officer is to be appointed. More than 500, then welfare officer is to be appointed. More than 250, then a canteen is to be provided by the occupier. This 1,000, 500, 250, all those threshold limits are coming down. Instead of 1,000, it is becoming 500. Instead of 500, it is becoming 250. Instead of 250, it is becoming 100, right? Yeah, so these are all certain key points with respect to factories. Now it is on contract labor. Again, many of us are aware already that the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act will be applicable to an establishment which engages more than 20 contract workers. Similarly, it will be applicable to a contractor who engages 20 or more workers under him. This threshold of 20 is becoming 50. So up to 49, it will not be applicable post to the implementation of codes, right? And the term core activity, it is defined, and for those core activities, the principal employer cannot engage a contractor. And licensing of contractor, it is normally done unit-wise, but after the introduction of codes, you can club the units and get a common license. It is possible. Again, it is a kind of ease of doing the compliance. And under Section 16 of the Contract Labor Act, contractor is responsible for providing amenities, starting from providing the drinking water to contract workers. Only if the contractor fails, the liability passes on to the principal employer. But through the codes, the liability is directly latched on the principal employer, right? So it will not be with contractor. And if a person is hired in one state by a contractor and for deployment in an establishment which is situated in a different state, then that person is considered to be the interested migrant worker, right? So when we say interested migrant worker, all these workers will be essentially contract workers, because only those who are hired through contractors, they would become interested migrant workers. That is the current situation. But after the introduction of codes, even the persons who are directly employed, if their salaries are less than 18,000 per month, then they can also be treated as interested migrant workers. That is the change, along with the persons who are hired along with, by the contractor. I move on. So this slide is specifically for interested migrant workers. There are certain specific aspects. If there are 5 or more such interested migrant workers employed in an establishment, then that establishment, for that establishment, the Interstate Migrant Workers Act will become applicable. So this threshold is now getting increased to 10. So instead of 5, this will become 10. And the second point we have already discussed, it is not necessary that they are all to be hired through a contractor. Even if they are directly hired by the employer, they will also be considered as interstate migrant workers. And in case of any accident or serious bodily injury, the report, the accident report, is to be submitted in 2 places. One in the place where he is working, and another one in the place that is his home state, the authority in his home state. To him also it is to be submitted, and information is to be passed on to the relatives of the worker. And there was a provision of paying a displacement allowance for only one time, at the first time when he comes from his home state. But that provision is now removed. It is not required by the employers to make displacement allowance anymore post to the implementation of codes. And journey allowance, it is to be paid on annual basis for going to his home state and coming back to the place of employment. It is not only for his expenditure, but for his family also this is to be paid. And when it comes to the question of public distribution system, PDS, I think the interstate migrant workers can this benefit in a place of their choice. Can be in the home state or it can be in the destination state. And a toll-free helpline is also to be provided by the appropriate government for the interstate migrant workers. I move on. I think with this slide, we are coming to an end of the Occupational Safety Code. So now the appointment orders are made mandatory. So currently it is not mandated, right? It is not mentioned either in the Factories Act or any of the state-specific Shops and Establishments Act, except for few states. But now through the courts, the appointment orders are made as a mandate, and it is to be done within 3 months. Within 3 months from the implementation of the codes, it is to be done. You can see section 6(1)(f) very clearly says every employer shall within 3 months, which is there in the bold letters. So the next point is third-party audit and certification. So the government will form a private body actually. So it is other than the government machinery. That panel will be, they will have experts and they will do the audit on a regular basis, particularly for the startup companies and some category of establishments which are mentioned in the scheme to be framed. So the report will be submitted to the employer concerned as well as to the appropriate government. So the appropriate government, after studying the report, if it is required, then they can come up with amendment in any of these codes. That is the idea. So this will be done on a regular basis. And the single registration. So it is going to be like we saw common licensing, and it is going to be a kind of common registration. So now we do registration under Factories Act, we do registration under Shops and Establishments Act, registration is there for PF, there is registration under ESI, registration under ISMW, under contract labor. So multiple registrations are prescribed. Now this will become common. One registration is sufficient. So this is the section 3(1). This talks about that. So post the implementation of codes, one registration is sufficient. That will be utilized for all purposes. And yeah, daily hours, weekly hours, other working conditions, weekly rest interval, and spread over. I think I have mentioned this: 8 hours, 48 hours, half an hour minimum rest interval, and spread over. Spread over means it is the regular working hours and the interval put together. It should not go beyond 12 hours. So subject to these conditions, the appropriate governments can come up with their own rules. It is possible. And in a factory, currently, if a worker works for 240 days or more in a continuous period of 12 months, then that worker will become eligible for leave to be availed in the subsequent years at the rate of 1 day for every 20 days of work performed. Right. So that qualifying number of 240 days is getting reduced to 180 days. So this is more advantageous for the workers. So the worker, if he has completed 180 days of work in a continuous period of 12 months, then he will become eligible for leave instead of the earlier position of 240 days. Then common license, as I said, for factory, for contract labor, and for BD and cigar establishments, we can have, instead of separate license, we can have common license. But of course, we have to wait for the implementation of the rules also, right? Only codes are released now from 2111. So, but we may have to wait for the subordinate legislations. That may take another 3 to 4 months, if I'm right. So once that is done, then probably we can utilize these provisions. And like we provide amenities for men and women, post the implementation, we may have to provide the amenities for the third gender also separately, right? So it will be for men, women, and third gender. And health examination, again, it becomes a mandate. Whoever is more than 45 years of age and working in factory or mines or docks or involved in building and other construction workers, they are all entitled for this health examination on annual basis every year within 120 days. That is starting from January 1st within 120 days, which means roughly before April 30th. This examination is to be done, and cost is to be borne by the employer. and employer has to maintain a record, and every year this is to be done. The idea is to keep them fit for the work, to reduce absenteeism and to increase productivity. That is the idea. Now I move on. I think we have come to the end of occupational safety code. Now we will move on to social security, right? So PF and ESI, there are no changes. As of now, there are no changes. We can just go ahead with whatever we have been doing so far. But one or two things which are proposed is the employees whose wages are more than the notified wage. Currently it is 15,000. They are also to be counted to check whether the establishment has more than 20 employees or not. Because only for those establishments who are engaging more than 20 persons, the PF Act will become applicable. So there is a confusion among the employers. We need to include only those persons who are drawing less than 15, or we have to include the persons who are drawing more than 15,000 also. But now it is clear through the courts, both the categories of employees are to be considered for the count. And the apprentices engaged under the Apprentices Act are very specifically excluded from the provisions of the PF Act. Probably the companies may have a practice of engaging apprentices or trainees or learners out of their own policies. Then I think if it is as per the certified standing orders of the company, then that is fine. Otherwise, they will also be treated as employees, and the authorities may ask the employer to cover those persons also under PF. And in case if a company wants to avail exemption provision, which is there in current section 17 of the PF Act, going forward, at least 100% should be there for an establishment if they want to seek exemption under section 17, right? That is, the provision is available, but practically it is not entertained nowadays. So these are all certain things with respect to PF. As I said, otherwise, whatever we do, the same thing remains. We have to continue with that. Now it is with ESI. Voluntary coverage is possible now. See, for ESI, the threshold limit is 10. If there are 10 or more employees, then that establishment shall be covered and registered under ESI. But through the codes, even if the number of employees is less than 10, then if the majority of the employees are interested and management is also willing, then with the joint application, they can cover their establishments under ESI so that the employees are made, probably the medical facilities are made available for the employees through the ESI dispensaries. And currently, the plantations, the ESI Act is not applicable, but now the option is given, right? So because there are medical facilities mandated under the Plantation Labour Act itself, but if some owner of the plantation feels that that is not sufficient, he can go in for coverage under ESI, so that the workers under him are availing the medical benefits through ESI. And even if there is one person engaged in an establishment which is involved in hazardous or life-threatening activities, then the central government has got powers to extend the provisions of ESI to those establishments. And for mines, it is not applicable, ESI, as of now. But after the implementation of codes, if there are 10 or more persons working in the mine, then for them, the ESI Act will become applicable. And presumption as to the accident while commutation between residence and place of employment. Currently, the default position is it is not considered to be an employment injury. But we will normally apply the theory of notional extension. Then if it is satisfied that it is due to employment, then that will be considered as employment injury. The default position is now changing. If there is an accident happening during commutation between the place of work and home, then the default position is it will be treated as employment injury. If it is not so, then the otherwise is to be proved. And finally, if some employee is not covered under ESI, but otherwise coverable, but even if covered, the contributions are not made in respect of that employee. Still, the employee can go and avail medical benefits from ESI, but the ESI corporation will make attempt to recover the cost incurred from the employer concerned, right? So that is the last provision. So we move on. This is with respect to gratuity. Yeah, now through the codes, fixed term employment is allowed. So employers can engage employees for a specific term. So after the term comes to a close, that person can be terminated from the service. That will not be considered as retrenchment. But those persons, fixed term employees, would be treated on par with the regular employees, permanent employees from day one. And they will also be eligible for all the facilities on proportionate basis. So particularly with respect to gratuity, we know it will be available only for those persons who are completing 5 years of continuous service. But that is not applicable for fixed term. Even if they complete 1 year, they are entitled for gratuity on a proportionate basis. And with respect to working journalists, the qualifying years of service is 3. Right. So this is how it is going to be for fixed term employees, 1 year. For working journalists, it is 3 years. And for others, normal, it is 5 years of continuous service. Yeah. So the other areas, if there are 50 or more employees engaged in an establishment, then that employer shall provide creche for the use of the women employees. And the second point is on employment information, chapter 13 under Code on Social Security. This is the Current Employment Exchanges Act. So currently the act will be applicable if there are 25 or more employees. That number is coming down. So this will become applicable now if there are 20 or more employees, right? And this 50% cap in the wages will be applicable for the employees' compensation purposes also. And the presumption as to the accident, similar to ESI, for Employees Compensation Act, that purpose also, the same presumption will continue. And the Employees Compensation Act will now have the definition for the term appropriate government. And the last 2 points, I think this is very, very important because I think the unorganized workers, the gig workers, the platform workers, probably the home-based workers, the self-employed workers, wage workers, they are all given recognition. See, we have roughly 60 crore people working as far as our country is concerned. So the workforce is around 60 crore. Out of the 60 crore, only 10% is in the formal employment, organized employment. 90% is in the unorganized sector only. But for them, these labor legislations are not applicable. But now, through the introduction of codes, the government is trying to extend at least the social security benefits to the unorganized workers or the gig workers or the platform workers. That is the idea. But of course, both the central government as well as various state governments, they have to come up with schemes for making it rolling. I move on. So when it comes to the question of assessment for ESI and PF, yes, after the inspection, the enforcement officer can make a claim for the last 5 years, but not beyond that. And inspector cum facilitator, same thing. For all codes, instead of inspectors, they will now be known as inspectors cum facilitators. And penalty in all codes, again, for the contraventions, it is getting increased, and compounding of offense is available. And I would like to draw your attention to the last point, which is about Aadhaar. See, for identity of a person, for making any payment as an employee or otherwise, I think Aadhaar card is a must. So as employer, let us very clearly make it as part of recruitment kit to get the Aadhaar number of the person joining in the company, and also Aadhaar numbers of his family members, at least the first degree family members, so that in case of death of an employee, the payment has to go to his family members or the nominees. Yeah, I move on. I think now we have completed the third code. This is the final one, industrial relations. So what is an industry? I think that was clarified by the Supreme Court as early in 1978 in Bangalore water supply case. It's a very, very landmark case. So any place where any systematic activity is carried on with the cooperation of employer and the workmen, and if it is for serving the purposes of human wants or wishes, if these 3 ingredients are present, then that place will be termed as industry, right? Unfortunately, this definition has not gone into the statute book. It is done only now through the courts. And but if in some cases, if it is involved in domestic services, or there are institutions engaged in charitable, social, or philanthropic services, they are all excluded. For them, none of these labor laws would be applicable. And concerted mass casual leave, if more than 50% of the employees in an establishment, if they go on casual leave, then that will be treated as strike. And if any employee resorts to willful go slow, then that will be treated as unfair labor practice. And the last point in this slide, permission for layoff, retrenchment, or closure of the establishment. Currently, if there are 100 or more workers, then those industrial establishments, I think they may have to seek permission from the government. Only then they can resort to these activities. This 100 threshold is getting increased to 300. I think this is the main bone of contention of the unions. They were opposing it, this particular change, tooth and nail. But of course, there was a request from the industry bodies for a long time to increase the number, because earlier the ceiling was 1,000, then it got reduced to 500, then got reduced to 100. Now, depending upon the business situation, now it is increased to 300. And yeah, so reskilling fund, it is now introduced. Currently, it is not there. So reskilling fund is only with respect to the retrenched workers, right? Apart from the retrenchment compensation, which the employer pays, the 15 days wage of the last drawn wage of the employee, that quantum is to be derived, and that should be paid by the employer to the fund, which is called a reskilling fund. The purpose is to reskill, multi-skill the persons who are already retrenched. This idea is to make them employable again when required in future. And grievance redressal committee, the maximum number of members was 6. Now that is increased to 10. And for strike and lockout, minimum notice period is 14 days. Maximum is 42 days, that is 6 weeks. So that 14 days remains, but the maximum 6 weeks, that is getting increased to 60 days. And time period for filing a grievance application, it was 3 years. Now that is reduced to 1 year. And the time period for raising industrial dispute before the conciliation officer, it was 3 years. That is getting reduced to 2 years. Now it is on standing orders and trade unions. The Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act will be applicable to those establishments which engage 100 or more workers. That is the current position. But post the implementation of code, this limit is also getting increased to 300. And now only the central government will provide the model standing orders. Earlier, central government as well as the other state governments as appropriate governments, they were providing. But now the model standing orders would be provided only by the central government. In case if application is made for certification of draft standing orders, and if there is no response from the authority concerned for 60 days, then it is deemed approval is given. And fixed term employment, like we saw in Code on Social Security, it is permitted. The definition is given under Industrial Relations Code also. But of course, they are entitled for proportionate benefits. Trade union, there is no compulsion for recognizing the trade union, right? Registration is there, but registration of trade union is to be done by the trade unions themselves under the Trade Unions Act. But recognition, it is to be done by the employer concerned, right? But there is no mandate. But now through the courts, that mandate is given. In case if there is sole trade union functioning in one establishment, then that trade union is to be necessarily recognized. In the situation of multiple trade unions, the one union which has the more than 50% of members of the establishment, that should be recognized. But if there are multiple unions and none of the unions has more than 50% of the members, then the employer is supposed to form a negotiating council. it is at the rate of 1 representative for every 20% of workers. So if there are 100 workers, then 5 members should be there. So either there will be recognized trade union available to negotiate with the management, or a negotiating council will be available. So there will be some body post to the implementation of codes available for negotiation with the employers. That is how it is going to be. And compounding of offence, as we discussed for other codes, that provision is there in Industrial Relations Code also. I think practically we have come to the end. This is only a gist under Code on Wages, Occupational Safety, and other codes also there. So quickly, Code on Wages, we discussed wages we defined. HRA is not part of wages. Gratuity is not part of wages. Minimum wages will be applicable for all industries. And the concept of floor wage, it is given statutory mandate now. Salary ceiling of 24,000 per month, that is removed under Payment of Wages Act. And salary is to be disbursed before 7th. The option of 10th day is not available. And deductions should be restricted to 50%. It cannot go beyond 50% from any of the salary of any of the employees. The wage settlement should be done within 2 working days, even for resignation cases. And bonus ceiling, we have to wait for the notification from the appropriate governments. And the concept of single registration is introduced. Common licensing is introduced. Definition of factory is changed from 10 to 20, from 20 to 40. Overtime, it can be done only with the consent. And women workers can be employed during the night time. Again, the consent is to be obtained. Eligibility for leave, instead of 240 days, it is coming down to 180 days. And amenities are to be provided, and amenities for the threshold limit, like safety officers, welfare officer, and canteen. The threshold number is coming down from 1,000 to 500, from 500 to 250, from 250 to 100. And amenities for the third gender, it must be provided along with how we provide for men and women separately as of now. And threshold limit for contract labor applicability, it is increased from 20 to 50. Core activity is defined, and in core activities, the contractors and contract workers cannot be engaged. It is prohibited, and regular employees of the contractor will not be considered as contract workers. Interstate migrant workers, definition is changed. Even the direct employees, when hired from other state, they can also become interstate migrant workers, provided their salaries are less than 18,000. Appointment orders are mandated. Health examination is made compulsory. And under Code on Social Security, voluntary coverage under ESI is now possible. Mines coming under the purview of ESI. For fixed term employees, 1 year period is sufficient for becoming eligible for gratuity. For working journalists, it is 3 years. For others, it is going to be the same 5 years of continuous service. Contract workers are now eligible for, I think this is very crucial again. The contract workers, I think the term employee under Code on Social Security includes contract workers. So automatically, directly, they become eligible for gratuity now. And Social Security for unorganized workers, we discussed, it is planned, but we have to wait for the schemes to be introduced. Under Industrial Relations Code, the concerted mass casual leave, it will be treated as strike. Willful go slow, it will be treated as unfair labor practice. Time period for raising industrial dispute is reduced from 3 years to 2 years. Reskilling fund is introduced through the courts, and the threshold increased for layoff, retrenchment, and closure from 100 to 300. Fixed term employment now allowed. Compulsory recognition of trade unions, it is now made as a mandate. And finally, these are all certain common aspects. The concept of deemed approval is brought in. Compounding of offences for all the courts, it is again introduced. And the records can be maintained electronically, it is possible. And the government is attempting to make everything online, whether it is submission of returns or submission of application for registration or application for license for any other purpose. And inspectors would now be known as inspectors cum facilitators. I think we have come to the end. Quickly, I was just rushing. Once again, I thank Madhukar. It is back to you. Thank you so much once again for the opportunity given. Whatever little I know on labor code, I just thought I could utilize this opportunity to share with the professional, vibrant HR group. Yeah, it is back to you, Madhukar. if we have anything to express. Madhukar, are you there? In case if there are questions, please raise it. No. Stop sharing.
Stop. Stop.
வெளியில வந்துருச்சா?
இல்ல இருக்கும்.
Photos வரும்.
இருக்கு.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. No, if there are questions. Any of the participants, do you have any question? Yeah, I'm listening.
Participants, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Yes. No.
Yes, you may please post your queries.
Hear me now. Hear me now. Hear me now. Hear me now. Hear me now.
Sir, try unmuting your own speaker.
Are we audible to you? Participants, please. Participants. One second. Okay, I can see a query actually if both the employer and the employee do not opt for ESI, what will be the further course of registration? That is immaterial in case an establishment has 10 or more employees in their establishment, they have to necessarily register themselves under ESI, irrespective of the base ceiling. Right.